Most family problems can be solved through frank and friendly discussion, which points the way to a happy family life.
You know, this is beginning to be quite a family project.
It certainly is.
You know, growing up, probably the greatest impact in my life outside of my immediate family, my parents, my brother, my sister, maybe even extended family cousins, are the friendships that I had. I can think back to my formative years, to my elementary and middle school and high school years, and I can still see the faces and remember the names of those friends that impacted me. Whether it was kids in the neighborhood, whether it was friends from school, people on the different teams and activities I was involved in, friends from the youth group, I can remember them. I can remember the things they've done. And for some of these people, I guess if you count social media, it's different, but I haven't seen some of them for 30 years, 40 years. But the impact that they've had in my life is huge. Some of that impact has been positive. And I can remember the good things that I learned and what we did together and we encouraged each other. But I can also remember the negative impact that some of those friendships had in my life that have negatively impacted me. And now at 40 years old, I probably should go to a therapist and talk to them about those things. Because the reality is, friendships, relationships have a huge impact in the lives of children. And as we learned on last week, that as parents are called to help protect their children. And there's probably no area where you need to be more involved than in their relational life. Because friendships, relationships have a huge impact on how kids grow, develop, and then how they live their subsequent years as an adult. See, have you ever had this experience? I know I have. We've raised two kids who are now adults. We have a 14-year-old. And when they were younger, especially 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, I remember my wife Jamie and I, we would invest countless hours trying to mold, shape, model the things that are important to our kids. And then they would go off to someone's house. And they would come back and I'd say, what happened to our perfect, precious little child? It's like the invasion of the body snatchers. They look the same, but there's something different. All it takes is a small interaction with some snot-nosed little brat. And your perfect child becomes a snot-nosed little brat. Why? Because kids are wired a certain way. Kids are inclined to look for acceptance. Really, all of us are, but especially in those formative years, acceptance is so huge. When kids are real little, they just want the acceptance of mom and dad. As they grow, they want the acceptance of their peers. And so kids have a way of adapting and shaping to the environments that they're in order to be accepted. It changes how they talk. It changes their mannerisms. It changes their attitude. It changes their vocabulary. It changes their respect for authority. This isn't just when they're little. I remember for myself, I've got an older brother. I've always looked up to him. I'm taller than him, but I've always looked up to him. And my brother has lived an interesting life, very colorful. But I remember when he was about 19, I was about 17, he managed a pizza place and I worked there. It's what you did when you grew up in New York. You worked at a pizza place. And I remember one time, we were raised the same way, but for him at that stage of his life, God, the things of God, caring about God was like, yeah, whatever. God hadn't done anything for me, and I don't really want anything to do with God. I, on the other hand, wanted to be a pastor. And I remember we're at the pizza place, and we're working, and there's all kind of teenagers. This was a teenage hangout. It was businessmen and women that came during lunch, and then the rest of the time it was just where everyone in that community came and hung out. And so I ended up being influenced, the whole idea of wanting acceptance, and I would use some language that, I know you all have used. I behaved in some ways that weren't demonstratively a Christian. And I remember one time we're closing up the shop afterward. Doors are closed. My brother and I are cleaning, mopping the floors, doing all you need to do. And he says, Justin, be you. Stop trying to fit in. I know, this was God speaking through my brother. He said, I know what God's called you to. Don't compromise. That was huge for me. He said, don't want to be like me. I always wanted to be like my brother. Don't want to be like me. Be like who God's called you to. But kids are inclined to look for acceptance. Little kids, middle school kids, high school kids. So how do we help navigate our children through the whole relational morose that they go through from when they're little all the way through when they're dating? Because we have to help them. Because friends influence in huge ways. Here's what the book of Proverbs says. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. There is a power of influence that friends have. So we have to help our kids to navigate this because they don't know how to do it. They think they know, and if we sit there and go, well, we'll just let them do it, they'll figure it out. They know who they like and who they don't like. They'll figure it out. You are abdicating your responsibility to help protect them. Elsewhere in the book of Proverbs, it says this, the righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. We have to help our children to choose their friends carefully. That is our responsibility as parents. It's interesting, that phrase, choose carefully. In some translations, it uses the word cautious. In the original language, Hebrew, that term, choose carefully, comes from a verb that means to spy out or to examine. We are to spy out. We are to look. We are to examine. We are to understand very well who the people are that we're choosing to be friends with. Because otherwise, we will be led astray. Listen, you can't expect your kids to do that. You can't expect them to know how to do that. You have to do that. In other words, if you say, should my children be friends with this person? Well, they go to school together. They live in our neighborhood. They're on the same sports team. If that is your standard, you are abdicating your role. You're not spying out. You're not carefully examining, helping them to choose wisely who their friends are. You have to go deeper than that. You have to ask some pointed questions. So here's 3 that you can ask. What do I know about this child's family? That is hugely important. So your kid says, hey, I want to go over to Alex's house, not Alex Donovan, because we know the answer would be yes. I want to go to his house. Can I go? Oh, well, who's this Alex kid? Oh, he sits behind me in class. That's not a good enough reason. What do you know about his parents? What do you know about his family? What about his siblings? What environment are you sending this child into? Here's another one. What do I know about this child's behavior and character? What do you know about it? Well, the teacher says the kid's rambunctious and crazy and smashes people with books all the time. Yeah, you can go. I'll talk to the coach. What does the coach say about the child? Whatever it is. Here's a third one. Will my child be exposed to things which are inappropriate? Now, it's somewhat difficult to know, but you have to base it on what you can know. Well, they live in a part of town where there's things happening in that neighborhood that I'm not comfortable with. I may not want them to see that. I may not want them to be exposed to those type things. So you need to ask those questions. If you don't know the answers to those questions, I'm telling you, they should not go play with that kid. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, you get the answers. Some of them may not be positive. That doesn't mean it's, okay, they can't go. You just need to be informed. You need to make the decision. You need to lead them. You have to examine carefully, spy out, and then make a decision. So you've got these questions answered. You understand about this child, and you, if you're married, your spouse have talked about it and prayed about it. You've talked about it with your child. You said, yeah, you can spend some time with this kid. That's no problem. Great. Here's the first and thing that you can do. Remember, a parent's job is to help protect their children. Here's the first one. Be present at the early interactions. Can I just tell you? Now, I'm not talking about a family that you know well, you've known for years. No, I'm talking about the unknown. You're crazy if you just send them off into the great unknown at 9 years old. Oh, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. You're insane. You need to protect your children. So be present at the early interactions. Say, hey, you want to have him over? You want to have her over? They can come here. They can play. You guys can play video games, play outside, do all that kind of stuff. Come over here. It might mean making an investment in some things. You want the kids to come hang out at your house? Buy stuff that kids want to do. You know, that's you're investing in your kids. But be present. If it's something that can't be at your house, you're invited to a birthday party, go along. The parents, I want to take the kids to the park. I want to take them to Chuck E. Cheese. Go along. Just tag along. Say, I want to be there. I want to see how the interactions happen. I want to see what this child's like, the environment's like. Tag along. If the parents say you can't come and be at the birthday party, say that's fine, then neither can my child. It's a simple answer. You are in charge. Parenting kids in their relational life, in any aspect, but especially in the relational life, is not a democracy. It's a dictatorship. And you say no, and that's the end. They're going to yell, scream, have a hissy fit, all that kind of stuff. But you can say no. And I know what you're thinking. What about if it's a sleepover? Listen to me. Be very, 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 very cautious with sleepovers. I'm not saying, I know people saying kids should never do a sleepover. I'm not saying that. My children all did sleepovers, but we were very cautious. We knew exactly who they were going, whose house they were going to, what was going to happen. We knew the parents. We knew everything about it. Because here's the deal. One thing about sleepovers is they are relationally intense, and the peer pressure is at a fever pitch. They will do things to fit in, to find acceptance, to not feel ostracized because they are left alone with a group of peers for 9 hours. And if you think a sleepover has anything to do with sleep, get your head examined. The second thing is, remember, a parent's job is to help protect their children. At a sleepover is when they are most unprotected. Physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. I know for myself, the first time I was ever exposed to pornography was at a sleepover. I can tell you to this day the title of the video that we watched. I was 10 years old. I remember scenes that burned in my mind. I don't know what my mom knew. My dad knew exactly whose house we were going to. He knew everything about it. The guy was an elder in the church, and it was his kids. It was going to be safe. It was going to be fine. I'm not saying my dad abdicated. He did everything. You can do all that. Be very cautious when it comes to sleepovers. You have every right to say no. Find workarounds. Hey, you can go. You can stay until 10 o'clock, and then I'll pick you up. Whatever. I'll bring you back in the morning at 7, and you can have breakfast. You just, whatever. Find ways. Work with your kids. But you don't have to just go along with it because your kids want to. So be present at early interactions. Here's another one. Monitor the impact. So you know this child, you feel good about it, you've met the parents, you know things about them. All this is going on. Now, watch what happens as they interact. Monitor it. See what happens. In the book of 1 Corinthians, it says this. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. It's so easy to be misled here. Well, I'm raising my kids to be leaders. I trust them to do the right thing. That's why it says don't be misled. It's so simple to lose track of this. But our kids are wired, they're oriented to want acceptance. And over time, they can be negatively impacted. So watch for the consequences of these interactions. What is the impact of being around this friend, this person, this group of people having on your child? If it's negative, if they start behaving different, acting different. I'm not saying one time they come back and they're a little, listen, there's teaching, there's training, there's all those kind of things. I'm talking about, are you seeing a pattern? Big swings, big changes. I'm telling you, if anyone is negatively impacting your child, end the relationship immediately. This is a zero tolerance. You just end it. Nope, sorry, you can't go there anymore. Now, I know what you're thinking, but I can't control who my kids are in school with. I can't control who they're on the team with. I can't control who lives in our neighborhood. Again, you're not a victim. So, you can't control who they're in school with, you're right, but you have this thing called a voice, and they have this thing called a teacher. Go with your voice and speak to their teacher about this child. Can they move where their desk is? Talk to the administration. Can they change classes? So, well, they're on the team. Talk to the coach. Take them off the team. Change leagues. Well, they're in the neighborhood. Listen, great. They live in your neighborhood. They're your next door neighbor, and they come knock on the door. Can your kid come out and play? No, he can't. Why? Because I don't like you? No. No. They come back the next day. Can he come out and play? No. They come back the next day. Can she come out and play? No. Eventually, they stop knocking. If they keep knocking, you just stop answering. They'll get the hint. Because if someone is negatively impacting your children, you need to end the relationship. That's your responsibility. You have to protect your children. I know families. Listen, they've done everything. They've tried all those things. It doesn't work. You can take extreme measures. Take them out of school. I know families that have taken their children out of school because of the negative impact. I know families that have said no sports because of the negative impact. I know families that have moved out of neighborhoods because of the negative impact. And every one of those families that have done those things have never said to me, I regret doing that. If you have to take extreme measures because of the negative impact friends, relationships are having on your kids, I'm telling you, it may be years later, but you'll say, thank God. Thank God we did that. So on the front end, you decide based on what you know. You decide based on what you know, you investigate, you spy out. On the back end, once a relationship is started, you decide based on what you see. But here's the key. In both cases, you decide. You decide, and you can continue to decide. Just because you said yes doesn't mean it's forever. Just because you said you can go play with this kid doesn't mean that you could do it a second time or a third time, or I said yes, now if I break off the relationship, then what are they going to think? Listen, I know it might sound extreme. I'm talking about worst case. I'm not talking about just, every once in a while your kids get with somebody, they come back a little rambunctious. I'm talking about a negative impact where you see them going on a trajectory that is not going to help. You need to be willing to do what needs to be done as a parent to protect your child. And you say, well, isn't that extreme? I just want to say this. This is your child's life. What's more important? It seems a little harsh. This is your kid. Well, sell the house. I might lose money. This is your child. I'm telling you, if they end up in the legal system, it will cost you more in legal fees than a little bit of inconvenience in moving. Don't believe me? Talk to a lawyer. They bill well. So this is your child's life. Now, I know this leads to a question a lot of parents ask. It's a legitimate question. Here it is. What about children being a positive influence? It's a great question. I mean, isn't that what we're called to be as Christians? To go into the world, make disciples, be a positive influence, reach the unchurched. How are they supposed to do that if every time they're in a negative relationship, I pull them out? Again, I'm not talking about anything negative at all. There are times you teach, you train, you work with them, you tell them how to respond appropriately, all those kind of things. So I'm not talking about one time they get in a fight with a friend and you say, that's it. I'm not talking about one time a friend, just like your child may have some time where they misbehave. You hope that parent doesn't say, hey, everything's been great, they have a misbehavior, that's it. Kids can't be friends. I'm not talking about extreme things like that. I'm talking about an ongoing pattern. When you see an ongoing pattern of negativity, you have to decide, is outreach really happening? In other words, if your kid is being negatively influenced, outreach isn't happening. So yes, your kids should be positive influence. They ought to make a difference where they go. But here's the truth. Your child is not meant to be sacrificed on the altar of outreach. That's not biblical. That's not what your kids are called to. It's not what you're called to let your kids be. Listen to me. You still have a heart for that child? You still have a heart for that family? Great. Don't sacrifice your child. You go after the parents. You do it. Call up the parents and let me take you out for coffee. Let's get together. Let's do something. But don't put it on the lap of a 12-year-old. So if your children, stop being the influencer and start becoming the influenced, that's when it's time to end the relationship. That's when they're no longer being a positive influence. They're being negatively influenced. Therefore, outreach isn't happening. Therefore, end the relationship. Here's another question people will ask. That all, Pastor, what you said, that sounds well and good when they're like toddlers in elementary school, but what about as they get older into middle school or high school? This isn't going to work, right? Wrong. Right and wrong. It won't work the same way. But if you begin now, if you have young children and you begin this now, then some of it will continue naturally as they get older. But it will look different. If you have older children now, you have to start and it looks different. But the principles are the same. So in other words, yes, as they get older, middle school, high school, you can't dictate terms all the time. If you do, I promise you, what will most likely end up happening is you will actually push them right into the arms of the people you don't want them to be with. You'll push them into that direction. You'll push them into those friendships. It's called rebelliousness. And so you have to step back and begin to allow your children, middle school and certainly in high school, independence, decision-making, learning separation. Again, when they're little, mom and dad's acceptance means everything. As they get older, peer acceptance is so much more important. And it's normal, it's natural. So you have to change, but it still works, but it works different. It's less controlling and more interactive. So if you've got middle schoolers and high schoolers, I'm telling you, the principles are the same. You just have to apply them different. Because what happens is they get into middle school and high school, if you've laid the groundwork especially, what will happen is they will begin to take all those things that you have shown them, how to examine friends, how to monitor the impact, and they'll begin to apply it to themselves. They will begin to lean on the things you taught, you modeled, and you walked out. They'll begin to spy out their friends. They'll begin to say, I don't like the way this is impacting me. They'll begin to say, I need to step away from this relationship. And when you see that, put your arms around them and say, I'm so proud of you. I see you making these hard decisions, but wise decisions. That I wish I had that level of maturity when I was your age. Say, man, and you say, how did you learn that? Don't say, aren't you glad I taught you this? Ask them, how did you know to do that? A lot of times they'll say, well, Mom, it's what you and Dad taught me. And you'll say, wow, we tried our best. Now, if you've modeled it, if you haven't, then you have to begin to talk and work through those things. The other thing is this. Either way, whether you've modeled this early or you're starting now, what you have to do as you begin to give them greater freedom, greater ability to make their own decisions, is this. Help them to lean on your input, your advice, and your discernment. Now, leaning on does not always mean taking. This is the hardest part of parenting. Because when they're little, you can make them do what you want. It's easy. You don't want them to see that kid, you just say no. When they're in high school, if they want to go see the kid, they got like a car, they've got freedom, and they're going to do it anyway. So what you have to do is begin to say, how can you lean on me? You can ask me things. You can come to my advice. Hey, Mom, Dad, what do you think about this person, this situation? How do you think I should respond when someone behaves like that? What do you think I should do about this opportunity? They'll begin to ask you things. They're leaning on your input, but they may not take it. And if they don't take it, just say, okay, that's fine. You heard me. Then be there afterward to say, hey, how did that go? What happened? What resulted from that? Hey, I didn't do it this way. I did it that way. Hey, what resulted? It all fell apart. Now, again, don't say, I told you so. Say, why do you think that is? Maybe say, I wish I had listened to you. Say, well, there's a lot of times when I was growing up, I wish I had listened to my parents. But I didn't. You'll get through this. We'll get through this together. Next time, they'll listen better. So they'll begin to lean on you, but it's more interactive, it's less controlling. But the whole idea is you have to be there to help lead, guide, nurture, direct your children, to protect them. That's your responsibility. So, you need to be there in the early interactions. You need to help monitor the impact. You need to lead them and guide them. It leaves one type of relationship that we haven't talked about. And all the teenagers are going to flee. Because it's this. What about dating relationships? Yes, what about dating relationships? Dating relationships they're unique. Okay? What I want to say first of all is there are no clear biblical mandates on this is when it's right or wrong to date. When this is the right time to date, this is the right way to date. There are people who will write books that tell you that's there. It's not. There are things that are right and wrong to do with members of the opposite sex. That's clearly in the Scriptures. But these are principles you need to know about. But when it comes to dating, the issue is we get caught up in the kids, teenagers, but even I know adults who maybe have been divorced or never married and they're into their older stages of life, 30, and they get caught up in the emotion of dating. So this is a paraphrase, The Message by Eugene Peterson, but I like his take on this verse from Philippians chapter 1, verse 10. Learn to love appropriately. You need to use your head and test your feelings so that your love is sincere and intelligent, not sentimental gush. And that's what happens in the dating relationship, is that we get caught up in the sentiment, we get caught up in the feelings, and we need as parents to lead our children. See, your children's hearts and hormones can override their heads. And that is sentimental gush. And so they get overridden by that and they don't make good decisions. You as parents stand back and say, I see this for what it is. And I can help them. I can help direct. I can help navigate. You know, they've done studies. When two people, quote unquote, fall in love, it doesn't matter the stage of life, teenager, adulthood. They've done brain scans and tests. There is an endorphin that's released, and it affects the brain in such a way that it is as if the person has brain damage. This is true. So what happens is, and it normally lasts anywhere from 12 to 24 months. So why I tell people never get married if you've not been dating for at least 12 months. And so have you ever had this? You might have a friend, they're in a dating relationship and they're just with each other, and everything you know about this person is red flag. You're saying, what are you doing with this person? Oh, I love them. They hang the moon and the stars, and it's just this sentimental gush. And after about 12, 18 months, the relationship just unravels. And the person goes back to you and says, I can't believe I didn't see that. You ever heard that kind? It's because they, honest to God, couldn't. They had brain damage. Now take that, add in the whole reality of adolescence, and it's a disaster. So you need to help protect your kids. You need to lead them, guide them. You can lead with your head when they're going to be overruled by their hearts and their hormones. That's your job as a parent. So how do you do that? You talk to them and you teach them. You talk to them and you teach them. You talk a lot to them, especially about dating, about members of the opposite sex. Talk to them about their relationships with the opposite sex. Talk to them a lot. Talk to them about people that they have in their life. Hey, what do you like about this person? Who do you kind of like? Who are you maybe interested in? Who do you think is pretty or handsome? Who do you, oh, he's just so cool. They'll be embarrassed. That's your job as a parent, embarrass your kids. They won't want to talk about it, make them. That's why we talked about last week, media and stuff. Don't get in the car. It's a great time. They can't go anywhere. They don't have their earbuds in. They can't go to their room, and you just ask them, what do you think about Trevor? Now, if you're the mom asks one thing. Yeah, you say, hey, what do you think about Trevor? He's pretty studly, isn't he? Oh, Dad! But talk. Hey, what do you like about that person? What do you see in their personality that you find attractive? What do you see in them that you find as common interest? Ask them those things. And if they name somebody that you don't like, say, hey, I understand that. I understand why you would be attracted to that person. Have you thought about this, though? I have some concerns. Have you thought about these aspects of their life? Like, they haven't got above an F in any class ever. Or like, they already are sentenced to prison for a 20-year sentence. No, Dad, that doesn't matter. So have those conversations. Why? See, some parents think if I talk about feelings, members of the opposite sex, what they like, what they don't like, it's going to push them to start dating too soon. I don't find that true at all. What I find is this, as you talk to them, that talking will lead them to date the right type of person. And isn't that what you want? Isn't that what you want? They date the right type of person. My oldest daughter is married. She's 25. She dated basically 2 people. There was a couple losers that that wanted to date, and I put the kibosh on it. But there was 2. One young man, we knew his family, we knew him well. They went out one date, and she realized it wasn't the right deal. Great. The other, she's married to. So he's an awesome guy. We love him. And so you need to realize that talking about these things isn't going to push them to start dating faster. It's going to push them to be more discerning in who they ultimately date. So what you have to remember is there's some kind of guidelines. Like I always told our kids, don't ever date someone that what you know about them now, you couldn't see yourself marrying. Now, that doesn't mean you have to marry the first person you go out with. It means if you see things in their character, in their personality, in their spiritual life that you say, I can never see myself with someone like that, well then don't date them. But if what you know about them, then fine. As you get to know them more, you might have to change some things. But you need to help your kids to find the right type of people. See, the goal of dating is friendship, knowledge, and conversation. Develop friends with members of the opposite sex, even if it doesn't go anywhere ultimately. It might start romantic, it might just become a friendship. Wonderful. I have friends that are females that I've had since high school. Good friends. Nothing wrong with that. Friendship, knowledge. You're learning about what you like, what you need, what your personality, what shared interests, what are things that you will find attractive in someone that you're going to spend the rest of your life with. And conversation. It's amazing to me. I've done marriage counseling for pre-marriage counseling and marriage counseling for 20 years. It's amazing to me how many, and I'm stereotyping, but typically how many men can't form a cohesive sentence. And the wives say, how come he won't talk to me? And I'm going, did you have conversations when you were dating? No. Well, that should have been a clue. If he won't talk then, he's not going to talk later. So dating, you learn how to have a conversation with members of the opposite sex and talk about things, guys talk about guy things with guys. We don't know how to talk about real things with women. So we need to learn that kind of stuff. So next thing with dating, the first few dates should be part of a family event, especially as they're younger in high school or whatever. Now what I mean by that is, hey, they want to date your daughter, great. Come over, have dinner. Play a game. Sit around the fire pit. Roast marshmallows. Do something, watch a movie. Do something as a family. Why? Again, your job is to protect your children. So what that does is 2 things. One, there's nothing as powerful as a dad getting to know a potential suitor for his daughter and putting the fear of God in them. No. Hey, so this is good. I get to know this person. It protects them. If afterward, you have a conversation, you talk, and you say, hey, what did you think about this guy? Oh, I got to know him. I've got some concerns. The other thing it protects your children, especially your daughters, is if they say afterward, I don't want to date this guy anymore. You say, good girl. I raised you well. Now, what you can do as a dad or as a mom, if that young man calls back, you can say no. You can run interference. You can protect them from the harsh reality of having to say that. You can protect them. They'll get the clue. Well, if it's a young man, they'll eventually get the clue. But you need to do that. Now, that's how you talk about things. That's how you talk through those things and have conversations and say, hey, who are you going to date and why? And then the other thing that you need to do is not just talk, but you need to teach principles based on values. You need to teach principles, dating principles based on values. What I mean by that is this is a nice way of saying have some flaming rules. Okay, have rules of what that means. In other words, what's an age that they can start dating? I can't find one in the Bible. 16, 37, sounds better. Have an age. Have an age, this is when you can start dating. Based on a value. Don't just arbitrarily pick an age, because your kids will be counting down to that. Base it on a value and explain it to them. This is why we picked this age. It's not because we don't trust you. This is why. This isn't just, we came up with this out of the blue. When you date, you have to be home by a certain time. It's called a curfew. Again, I can't find one in the Bible, but pick a time. But have a reason for it. We have this time, and here's why. You can't go out on school nights. Here's why. So have rules based on values. Teach principles based on values. Why? Because then, as your kids begin this dating process, you have something in which to measure the person against. And they have something to measure the person against. It helps protect them. So, let me give you an example. You have a daughter, and she says, Dad, I'm whatever age we determined, we talked about, and I'm going to start a dating relationship, and this young man at school has approached me and would like to go out. You say, great. One of the rules that we have, as you know, is that the young man has to ask me. They have to come here. He has to ask me to go out with you. And the first date, as we talked about, has to be something family-oriented. See? Now, that's a simple rule. You've talked about it. It's based on values. If that young man won't honor that simple request, how in the world do you think he's going to honor your daughter? So you say, baby, I love you. We talked about it. I trust you, but this guy, he won't honor you in this. How's he going to honor you when you're driving somewhere? You can't go out with him. So he goes out. He comes over. Now you have him there, and you get to intimidate him and put the... But you get that exposure. If you have, and again, it's the first few dates, and it should be reciprocal. So if you have a daughter, maybe the first date's with you and your family, and then she wants to continue the relationship, and you say, well, okay, hey, we want to go over to his home and have dinner with his family. Great. Again, spy out the land, know what in the world's going on. If you have a son, it's the same exact thing. You tell him you're going to treat this young lady the same way I expect any young man to treat my daughter. So you're going to go to the father. You're going to ask permission. If they don't care if you go out and sit in the dark the first date, then I care, so you're going to come here. But you teach them to do the same things. So in essence, what you're doing is you are teaching them to look for and find a person they can spend the rest of their lives with. That's the goal. So you're teaching them. You should look for these qualities. Let's talk about it. Afterward, debrief. You have to talk ad nauseum about their dating relationships. You have to talk a lot about what they learn about members of the opposite sex. Encourage friendships. If it's a boy with girlfriend. I'm not even talking about romantic. Encourage friendships. Guys to girls. Girls to guys. Encourage those things. Why? Because they will learn things about themselves. They will learn how to do relationships and how to do it well. See, your job as a parent is to help your children learn how to establish positive relationships. Dating, romantic, friendships, that's your job. That's your responsibility. One day it won't. One day you won't have to protect your kids in that context anymore. But until then, do it and do it well. Have rules. What those rules are for your family, I don't know. But have rules. And the rules have to be more, especially when it comes to dating, it has to be more than be home at a certain time. You can only go here, and I've got a tracker on your phone, and I'll know where you are. Listen, those are fine rules, but it has to be more than that. It has to be deeper, and they have to be rules based on values so that you can teach and instruct, and you can talk about it. I'm telling you, if you do it, there will be times, I promise you, there'll be times when it's happening that your kids will not say thanks. But almost always, I know very, very, very few times when if you do this in love, grace, with their best interests at heart, and you open the lines of communication, you're not harsh, you're not demanding, you're not rigid, you have conversations, that on the back end, your kids won't say thank you. Even if, in the midst of it, they do something that is hurtful and wounding. So I just want to end with a story as the worship team comes forward. So my wife, love of my life, raised in a great family. Her parents did a lot of these things. When she was in high school, there was a young man that she wanted to have a romantic relationship with. Her mom and dad said, no, we don't feel good about this guy. We don't like him. This isn't positive for you. But they're learning to let go. And she says, I don't care. I want to do this. And even though everything inside them said, we don't want this for you, they felt like we need to let her do this because otherwise we risk chasing her away. That's not something you should do lightly. There's a lot of prayer. It led to a relationship that was a disaster, abusive, everything else. Afterward, though, she says, Mom and Dad, I wish I had listened to you. I wish I had that understanding and picked up what you were saying. That's hard. But now, she's got a great relationship with her parents. She's married to a guy that's the best. So I'm telling you, it takes grace. It takes patience. It takes navigating a dance that is not rigid. That's what makes it hard. But if you'll do this, if you will do your best to protect your children. You know, in Proverbs it says your children will rise up and call you blessed. I know it's talking about the Proverbs 31 women. But I believe it's for all parents. If you do this, you do it well, your kids will rise up and call you blessed. Would you stand with me?